Good evening and happy Easter. Christ is risen. He is risen indeed. There's a word to describe, or that could be used to describe the resurrection, a word that was invented by the writer J.R.R. Tolkien, and that word is Eucatastrophe. I think we all know what a catastrophe is. A catastrophe is when something suddenly out of the blue comes and destroys the situation we're in, turns everything upside down and brings everything to its knees. Well, the word "eu," or the prefix "eu" at the beginning of the word Eucatastrophe, is a Greek prefix which means good, a good catastrophe. It's the opposite of a catastrophe. It's a catastrophe where everything that was bad and destroyed becomes good and hopeful and new and fresh. And that's what we see in the resurrection. There's another Eucatastrophe in the Bible that I want to look at today and just have a few thoughts around. And that's the very famous story of the feeding of the 5,000. It appears in all four of the Gospels, but I particularly want to concentrate on the version that John gives us in his text. So Jesus and the disciples are coming out of a period of busyness and stress. They're tired, they need a rest. Jesus has been rejected in his hometown of Nazareth, and he's just heard terrible news about his cousin John, who we know as John the Baptist, who had been foully murdered in Herod's palace. That must have come as a horrible news to him. And the disciples have just returned from a mission trip. They've been sent off by Jesus in twos, and they've just come back. I'm sure they were full of stories, full of questions. They wanted to tell Jesus what they'd been up to in those weeks. And so they return, and Jesus sees that they're tired. They all need a break. So he says, let's go off to Bethsaida and have some peace. However, when they get there, the crowds are already there. Jesus is obviously drawing crowds, and they'd found out that they were off to Bethsaida, and they'd arrived there before them. You can imagine the hearts of those disciples dropping as they got there and realised that that peace they were planning to have was not going to happen. I'm sure we all recognise that, don't we? We're hanging on by our fingernails for a time of rest, and we get to that period of rest and something has gone wrong and we're needed elsewhere, and we need to jump into action rather than having a time of rest. However, Jesus doesn't respond in a depressed way at all. The Bible tells us that Jesus had compassion on the people and he healed their sick. So it was a hugely busy day with thousands of people there. And then the heat began to drain out of the day and the light began to dim. And the disciples realised that they hadn't got anywhere like any food for this huge crowd of people. And the crowd of people hadn't brought food to them either. There was going to be a terrible catastrophe. Here's the catastrophe about to happen. People had no food. What on earth were they going to do? So they approach Jesus and they say, Jesus, we've no food. How on earth are we going to feed these people? And Jesus says to them, you feed them. Knowing, as it says in the text, knowing what he was going to do. He said this to test them. You feed them. Well, of course they couldn't feed them. All this did was emphasize the impossibility of the task. But of course, Jesus knew what he was going to do. I think it's Philip who says, a load of money, more money than we could imagine, couldn't buy enough food for each of these people to have a little bit. And then Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, arrives and he says, Jesus, look, we've no food, but there's a boy here. There's a boy, and he's got 5 loaves and 2 fish, but what on earth's that going to do? I wonder in the back of his mind whether he thought, I'm sure Jesus can do something here. And this is the point of the Eucatastrophe. Now there's just one relationship that I just want to focus on for a few thoughts, and that's the relationship of Jesus to this boy. Who was the boy? We don't know anything more about him. He doesn't appear in the other Gospels. It's only in John's Gospel that the boy appears. We don't know how old he was. We don't know what his name was, where he came from, but we do know that he was there. He was close to Jesus. He turned up. He must have been curious. He must have been right at the centre of the crowd, sneaked in amongst all the grown-ups to find out who this Jesus was and what he was. So we know he was close to Jesus. We know that he gave everything he had to Jesus. We don't know if he initially voluntarily offered that, or if Andrew had sneaked around and seen that he was carrying a bag and said, hey, what have you got in there? But what we do know is that he did give all he had to Jesus. He didn't hold back. He didn't say, well, tell you what, I'll hold on to a fish and 2 loaves, and you can have 3 loaves of the fish, and then we'll be okay with that. No, he gave everything he had to Jesus. Given this situation, he must have known that there was no food going around and people needed food. He wasn't put off by the insignificance of his gift. Thousands and thousands of people there, and he had 5 loaves and 2 fish. I mean, as Andrew quite rightly points out, what on earth are we going to do with this? This is not going to be anywhere near enough. But the boy wasn't put off by the insignificance of his gift. And next we can remember that Jesus was so gracious in the use of that gift. Jesus, the creator of the universe, could have made enough food, ex nihilo as the phrase is, out of nothing for all those people. But graciously and kindly, he uses the boy's gift to perform the most amazing miracle. Just as a side note, I think when we look at the text properly, it's great that we can get rid of all those silly sermons that tell us, I've heard silly sermons, I'm sure you have too, that tell us that Jesus somehow convinced all the people to sit down and be nice and pull out their secreted lunches and share them with one another. And everyone got just about enough, and yet they had a lovely time. What a silly thing. That completely denies Jesus' divinity, his power, and this wonderful miracle. No, Jesus is kind and uses the boy's food. I love the fact that Jesus gives thanks for the food, this tiny amount of food in the face of thousands of people. He gives thanks for the food. And lastly, I was just think about the fact that Jesus doesn't leave all the remains on the floor to be trampled. There's a great deal of respect for the food there, and he says to the disciples to gather up the leftovers. Of course, 12 baskets of food show the magnitude of the miracle, but at the same time there is great respect for the food and showing great respect for the boy's gift, as well as for the creation, that God's creation in providing this food. So what about for us? Well, I think just a few points. I think this should give us confidence in offering up all of ourselves and all of what we have to Jesus. Jesus is trustworthy, he is powerful, he is kind, he is miraculous, and he will honour our gifts. Can we be like that boy? Are we going to be put off by the insignificance of our gifts? I hope not. Whatever our gifts are, maybe we are financially gifted, maybe we have talents and time, maybe we're seen as being gifted people, or maybe we just think we haven't got anything to offer. I want to tell you that that's not true. Whoever we are, we have something to offer. Maybe we have a beautiful smile. Can we offer that in service to the King? Maybe we can dance like David. Can we offer our dancing to Jesus for him to use, whatever it is we have? Have we tried offering it to Jesus for him to use and see what he can miraculously do with it? So, as we round off, I wonder, can there be anywhere better to put our treasure than in the hands of Jesus? That boy's treasure that day was 5 loaves and 2 fishes, and he put them in the hands of Jesus to see what Jesus could do by his miraculous power with it. And we, as a result, have this fabulous story, and we have this fabulous miracle that we've heard of. What about ourselves? Time, talents, gifts, money, whatever it might be. Can there be anywhere better to put it than in the hands of Jesus? Happy Easter. See you soon. Bye-bye.